Everything that is going on in Gaza happens because it is what the United States of America either directly wants to happen or doesn't care and like basically facilitates and doesn't give a shit. Here's a report on the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration from ProPublica. A year of empty threats and smokescreen policy, how the State Department let Israel get away with the horrors in Gaza. In early November, a small group of U.S. human rights diplomats met with a top official at Joe Biden's State Department to make one final emphatic plea. We must keep our word. Weeks before, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and the administration delivered their most explicit ultimatum yet to Israel, demanding the Israeli Defense Forces allow hundreds more truckloads of food and medicine into Gaza every day or else. American law and Biden's own policies prohibit arms sales to countries that restrict humanitarian aid. Israel had 30 days to comply. In the month that followed, the IDF was accused of roundly defying the U.S., its most important ally. The Israeli military tightened its grip, continued to restrict desperately needed aid trucks, and displaced 100,000 Palestinians from North Gaza, exacerbating what was already a dire crisis to its worst point since the war began. Several attendees at the November meeting, officials who helped lead the State Department's effort to promote racial equity, religious freedom, and other high-minded principles of democracy, said the United States' international credibility had been severely damaged by Biden's unstinting support of Israel. If there was ever a time to hold Israel accountable, one ambassador at the meeting told Tom Sullivan, the State Department's counselor and senior policy advisor to Blinken, it was now. But the decision had already been made. Sullivan said that the deadline would likely pass without action and Biden would continue sending shipments of bombs uninterrupted, according to two people who were in the meeting. So this is literally what was going on. Joe Biden was saying, I don't care what Israel does to kids. I'm giving them the bombs. And then people had the gall to tell me he couldn't do anything different. Those in the room deflated. Don't our law, policies, and morals demand it? An attendant told me later, reflecting on the decision to once again capitulate. What is the rationale of this approach? There is no explanation they could articulate. The answer is very simple, you dumb piece of shit. There is a foreign spy lobby that gives bribes to politicians, and a foreign intelligence agency that operates with impunity, going after anybody who articulates a care for human rights. They are the carrier pigeon of fucking fascism. They are the vector of disease. And Joe Biden is where he is because he was one of their biggest lapdogs. Soon after, when the 30-day deadline was up, Blinken made it official and said that Israelis had been implementing most of the steps he had laid out in his letter, all thanks to pressure the U.S. had applied. The choice was immediately called into question. On November 14th, the UN committee said that Israel's methods in Gaza, including its use of starvation as a weapon, was consistent with genocide. Amnesty International went further and concluded a genocide was underway. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defense minister for the war crime of deliberately starving civilians, among other allegations. The October red line was the last one Biden laid down, but it wasn't the first. His administration issued multiple threats, warnings, and admonishments to Israel about its conduct after October 7th, when the Palestinian militant group Hamas, blah, blah, blah. Government officials worry Biden's record of empty threats have given the Israelis a sense of impunity. Trump, who had made a raft of pro-Israel nominations, made it clear he wanted the war in Gaza to end before he took office and threatened that all hell will break out if Hamas did not release the hostages by then. On Wednesday, after months of negotiations, Israel and Hamas reached a ceasefire deal. While it will become clear over the next few days and months exactly what the contours of the agreement are, why it happened now, and who deserves the most credit, it's plausible that Trump's imminent ascension to the White House was its own form of a red line. Early reports suggest the deal looks similar to what has been on the table for months, raising the possibility that if the Biden administration had followed through on its tough words, a deal could have been reached earlier, saving lives. Netanyahu's conclusion was that Biden doesn't have enough oomph to make him pay a price, so he was willing to ignore him. Part of it is that Netanyahu learned that there is no cost to saying no to the current president, because he's a fucking loser. And there you have it. There you fucking have it. Here's Jeremy Corbyn on October 9th, 2023.
Wait a minute. Why you interrupt people when they're answering a question? Okay. Thank you. I'll go again then. Yesterday I sent out a statement calling for a ceasefire, calling for peace, and calling for an end to the occupation of Palestine, which of course is fundamentally the background to the whole issue. Obviously, all attacks are wrong. But do you think I've made my point?
Oh my God, the audio on this is so bad.
I think I've made my point.
What the man is saying is exactly right.
For the third time.
How many times do you
Yesterday, I sent out a
The man is right what he's saying.
made it very clear.
Take notice.
I wanted peace, I wanted a ceasefire, and I wanted a process which ended the Israeli occupation of Palestine, which is fundamental to it. I don't support any attacks, therefore I criticise them all. And that, I think, is the end of the matter. Thank you.
Jeremy Corbyn was right then, he's right now. And he was called an anti-Semite for it. One of the things that really pisses me off about all of this is the reality that if liberals had just had a spine, which I know is an impossibility and it is a contradiction. Liberal with a spine doesn't exist. But had they had a spine and said, hey, Kamala Harris, we will demand that you do this or we won't vote for you in mass, she would have pivoted and it would have saved Michigan. All right, let's take a look about the ceasefire and the Netanyahu shit.
Breaking news overnight, a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas is still in place, but there is, at the very least, a new delay this morning that everyone is trying to get a better handle on what it really means. Here's what we know at this hour. Israel's cabinet needs to vote to ratify the deal. That has not happened as it was expected to. Israel delayed it, citing last-minute issues. Again, what this now means exactly for the phased-in ceasefire and hostage deal, it's unclear. It's all supposed to begin on Sunday. Under the deal, Hamas has agreed to release 33 hostages in the first phase. Israel agreed to release 1,000-plus Palestinian prisoners. All of that resulting in a 42-day ceasefire with hopes it leads to a permanent one. Let's get to CNN's Bianna Golodriga. She's live in Tel Aviv with much more on this. Bianna, help us understand what is the status here? What is the latest?
Kate, good morning to you. So all of these things remain rather fluid, but the latest, it does appear to be just a delay in the process of getting a security cabinet and ultimately a party cabinet vote in the government here. As you noted, Prime Minister Netanyahu blaming Hamas for what he says is reneging on parts of the deal. Hamas, for their part, are denying those allegations. Everyone I'm speaking with here still believes, though, that a ceasefire deal will go into place as had been agreed upon beginning Sunday night, where we would see the first hostages in phase one of those 33 released here to Israel. Hospitals have been on standby and ready to receive those hostages. In terms of the politics of it all, Prime Minister Netanyahu is facing a lot of headwinds, as we've been reporting now for months, from the far-right elements specifically of his government, of his coalition, who do not want to agree to a deal under these terms. What the latest we have is that Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has said that his party would agree to stay with the coalition through phase one.
Wow, would you look at that? Would you look at that? The Israeli far right instantly capitulated the moment there was an ounce of pressure. Would you look at that? They were all bullshitters. They have no power at all. They 100% require the United States to do their genocide. The moment Donald Trump steps in and says, end the war, it's fucking over. They crumbled.
One of the deal, that is the release of those 33 hostages and the pause in fighting, only if the fighting would be allowed to proceed again after phase one. So there you just get a sense of how fluid and fragile this deal is right now. But Kate, when it comes to the hostages coming home, In phase one, as you noted, it would be the women, it would be children, it would be men over the age of 50 and those who are critically wounded. And among those women are 5 IDF spotters, our soldiers. Reminder that everyone in Israel is required to serve in the military. These 5 IDF spotters, all young, the ages of 19 to 21. I spoke with the cousin of one of them, that Agam Berger's cousin. She is 20 years old. I spoke with her cousin about what this moment may feel like for them when they are finally reunited and why there's a bittersweet sense in the country right now.
She's a beautiful young girl who's been 15 months in the hands of people that we know committed the worst atrocities against women in one day. We know what they did on October 7th. We also know from released hostages who came home what they did to hostages in captivity. That's the biggest fear. The physical aspect of it, and I don't need to go into detail. I think everyone who's watching understands what that fear means. But more importantly, the mental and emotional aspect of what kind of trauma something like that can do to a young girl who's 20 years old, who has her whole life ahead of hers.
All right, beyond.
So they're inventing hypothetical rapes to be scared of? I'm not saying it didn't happen. I mean, at this point, being a prisoner for over a year, as every civilian is targeted, I can't imagine. It would surprise me if they weren't tortured, honestly. Like, it legitimately would surprise me if they weren't tortured at this point. I'm not saying it's justified. I'm saying it would be shocking. Look at what the Gaza Strip looks like. It's nothing but pulverized concrete and dust.
Bianca Golodriga for us in Tel Aviv. Bianca's going to be all over it. A lot of developments could be coming on this today.
David Sanger, let me start with you. You, of course, have been covering this deal closely. Is there anything to this last-minute hiccup with the Israeli cabinet? How serious is that here?
It could be. We don't know yet. I do know that up to the last few hours before they announced the agreement yesterday, Casey, Hamas was coming up with sort of last-minute things they were putting on the
bullshit, lying. Oh my God, the CNN propaganda is insane.
Table. It's a very usual technique on their part, and the question is, can that be put down? But the bigger question is, who's right in this dispute between the two? And the answer is really both. So the deal is essentially what President Biden laid out in May. It also, you may notice, this is January. So, that deal did not happen. And I think the fact that they did link up so well and that Steve Witkoff...
Why didn't it happen? Because Joe Biden doesn't have any juice. He's a loser. I think like looking at the Netanyahu situation is really useful for understanding why I was so aggressive against Biden and why liberals were completely wrong the entire presidency, right? Like, look at how this deal could have been agreed to a year ago, right? But because Biden doesn't have any ability to put pressure on anyone, and standing up to him costs you absolutely nothing unless you're on the left. People just spat in his face on every right winger, from Manchin to Cinema to Netanyahu to every Republican. They spat in his fucking face every goddamn day, and he asked for more because he's a cuck. He's a loser. No more cucks to represent, liberals. Okay, can you just stop picking cucks? Like, they have this. Like, I even saw Project Liberal is trying to push Destiny. It's like they have I don't know if it's like hereditary cuckdom or like what's going on. Can you stop pushing literal cucks as your leaders, for the love of fucking God? And it is, Joe Biden really does represent liberalism. Like, there's nothing more to say. And then Donald Trump just went in there and said, we want a deal now or else, and they capitulated instantly. And it's not just like, and I want to make this clear, it's not just that I think it's personality or, words. It is the United States materially has leverage over Israel. We provide them cover in the United Nations. We provide them military assistance in the form of intelligence intercepts, satellite photographs, literal aerial reconnaissance. We have American troops on the ground helping operate the THAAD system, which is a missile defense system. All the Iron Dome missiles are built in the United States. Every single fighter jet is built in the United States. Every 2,000-pound bomb is built in the United States. They couldn't have an air force without the United States. They wouldn't be able to operate an aggressive war without the United States' monetary, military, logistical, intelligence support. This is a fucking fact, and diplomatic support, of course. Everything that is going on in Gaza happens because it is what the United States of America either directly wants to happen or doesn't care and like basically facilitates and doesn't give a shit. And so it isn't that, it's just personality, but it is also the fact that the United States of America could have said to Israel, you've gone too far. And that's all we wanted. I wasn't saying that, the United States of America needs to invade Israel and impose and do regime change, right? I was saying just follow American and international law and stop funding a goddamn genocide. But Joe Biden didn't want to do that. And just like he couldn't put pressure on Kamala Harris, or he couldn't put pressure on, he could put pressure on Kamala Harris. Anybody could. He could put pressure on Joe Manchin. He could put pressure on Kyrsten Sinema or on the Republican Party. He is a fucking born loser.
President Trump's incoming Mideast advisor was out there in lockstep with Brett McGurk, who was President Biden's equivalent for that and has worked for Republican presidents as well. I think that
the main difference is the principle, right? Like, yes, Joe Biden and Donald Trump are surrounded by the most extreme Zionists, but Joe Biden is their lapdog, and Donald Trump has his own opinions. And Donald Trump said, I think this war has gone on too long. It's hurting America's reputation. It's hurting Israel's reputation. You can't beat Hamas through military arms. You need to end the war. And he's right. And look at what's on CNN. Pathetic.
The difference, because they were able to go to Netanyahu, send Witkoff, and say, this is the deal that Trump wants. And I think that sort of helped put it over the marker.
David, Tom Malinowski, who's a former Democratic congressman, he put out a very interesting thread on Twitter, the first of which says that this was Biden's deal, but as much as I hate to say it, he couldn't have done it without Trump. Not so much Trump's performative threats to Hamas, but his willingness to tell Bibi bluntly that the war had to end by January 20th. And he essentially goes on to say that while Biden did a great job working with European leaders, he did not bring the sort of thuggery to the table that is required in the Middle East. Do you think Malinowski's right about this?
I think he's absolutely right. And the reason that I would say that is, first of all, the relationship between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu is poisonous, would be a polite phrase for the term, okay?
What are you talking about? Joe Biden says he's friends with Netanyahu. What do you mean? And also, who gives a fuck? If you're like, I hate you, here's billions of dollars of aid and weapons, who gives a shit? This is the most pathetic propaganda I've ever seen. What a fucking loser.